Hi, kids. Guess we're not doing too well with the SHP theory, I see. An idea that seemingly was half-cocked or came up with quick or something to that event. And a lot of the other fans have had to put the pieces together themselves because they're damn sure not going to do it over in Silent Hill Ascension land. That being said, I'm going to do all the heavy lifting for you guys, and we're going to absolutely puzzle piece the storylines together on the basis that the SHP, or Silent Hill phenomenon, is absolutely prevalent in every single one of the Silent Hills. That being said, with the assistance of a number of different notes and characters and events and things of that sort, I'm going to show you exactly why the SHP could and couldn't work. Let's go.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Silent Hill Origins serves as a prequel to the original Silent Hill game, following the journey of a truck driver, Travis Grady, as he becomes ensnared in the nightmarish town of Silent Hill. Alright, you with me so far? The game begins with Travis driving through foggy roads near Silent Hill when he swerves to avoid hitting a young girl who suddenly appears in the middle of the road. After the incident, Travis sets out to find the girl and unravel the mystery surrounding the town. As Travis explores Silent Hill, he encounters grotesque monsters, disturbing environments, and eerie supernatural stuff. Along the way, he discovers clues about the town's dark history, including the connection to a sinister cult and a series of ritualistic murders. Travis also experiences hallucinations and flashbacks that hint towards his own troubled past, including memories of his childhood and traumatic events involving his family. These revelations force Travis to confront his inner demons and come to terms with his own guilt and regrets. This is what we've come to know about Origins without the inclusion of what I'm about to tell you. But as Travis delves deeper into the heart of Silent Hill, he uncovers the truth about a girl he encountered in the road. Ultimately, Travis must confront the malevolent forces that dwell within Silent Hill and face the darkness within himself in order to survive. Okay? Throughout the game, you're faced with moral choices and branching paths that affect the outcome of the story, leading to multiple endings, which, as you do in Silent Hill. As we go through the story following Travis Grady, we have to keep something in mind. One of the biggest differences between him as a protagonist and any of the other protagonists in the Silent Hill franchise is he was not called, nor was he summoned to Silent Hill. This is the first and only character that actually ended up in Silent Hill that you play as, that simply showed up by happenstance. He has no clear motivations for showing up here. There was no letter, there was no message, there was nothing received that would have Travis Grady just need to come to Silent Hill. He was just a guy who stumbled across Silent Hill just in the nick of time, and Alessa used him to kind of gain some help. Now, this does not take away from the fact that he did in fact need he did in fact have a slew of different mental issues based on his own upbringing, things like that. But that was just incidental. He was not summoned. He didn't have, much like Harry Mason or any other character going into Silent Hill, there was a clear motivation of why they were going here. He did not. So then the question remains, what has Travis seeing all these terrible things? Is it just having a bad past? Is it having a connection more than he thinks with Alessa? Any of these things? No, it's actually simpler than that. Silent Hill serves as what I like to call a nexus point. A nexus point being the focal source of the energy coming out of whatever, essentially. But in this case, the nexus point being Silent Hill means anything that comes within its confines become exacerbated. If SHP had a name before there was a Silent Hill, it would be called Depression. However, once you get to Silent Hill as a nexus point, everything becomes influenced, everything becomes much worse, everything becomes far more sadistic or disturbing. You need a nexus point in order to initiate the beginning effects of SHP. And we see it here with Travis Grady as initially walking in. Despite what you may know about any of the previous citizens of Silent Hill, you get to see firsthand what happens when a stranger just wanders in. Now, based on Travis Grady's past, you already know the man has been through some shit. Things are very, very, very dire for him. Can definitely change a person, get them very depressed and all that good stuff. Very traumatic. However, it's supposed to remain that way. The only time it changes is once you go through the threshold of Silent Hill. And only through the threshold of Silent Hill. There's no other cities involved. This is the prequel to the original story. So this is, as a fan, when you're playing, this is all you know. Now, the reason I say this is all you know is because, based on chronological order, it's Origins first, of course. Set aside what you know about 1 and 2 and 3, before Origins comes out way later. Since we're doing this in order, all you're supposed to know, or all Grady is supposed to know, is what he sees. Zero ties to anything. He walks in, he's got these things on display. Now, this begs the question, how are these things affecting him just the same as it would someone with traumatic pasts and murder history and lighting their own parents on fire and family, all these things? How does that come into play? That part's actually a very, very simple explanation, and this is based on a lot of the lore already mentioned in previous notes and documents and things like that. This part of the story, or this part of the lore of Silent Hill, I call the catalyst lore. You see, in order for SHP to work and in order for the Nexus to become active before it gains power and momentum, it's going to need a catalyst. This catalyst happened to be Alessa Gillespie. Alessa Gillespie actually contained within inside of her these spiritual magical properties needed to convince, number one, the cult that she had to be sacrificed in the attempt to summon a god, but also it convinced Silent Hill itself that its power was greater than just delusional hallucinations or events and moments and spooky fog and things of that sort. It could actually be manipulated, contorted. Once Alessa became the poster child for bad vibes and bad juju, this is where the SHP becomes prevalent. So in part 1, when you play as Grady, you get to see what happens when her power infuses with the Nexus point that is Silent Hill, with the catalyst being Alessa Gillespie. But for the time being, everything is contained. The only reach Silent Hill had / the Catalyst had was in the outskirts of town. And this is why Travis Grady was able to be obtained and brought into Silent Hill, as he was the only quote-unquote innocent you could bring into the town. Everyone on the inside of the town, any residents and things of that sort, they were already compromised. So Alessa gaining any sort of help or advantage would not come from the inhabitants of Silent Hill, as they were the ones who put her there. But this is as far as her reach and Silent Hill's reach was. The Nexus point can only give you so much extension, I guess is the best way to put it. And with the SHP being born in this moment, if we're to believe the theories and notes from Last Message and Mr. Novak himself, if we're to believe that this would be ground zero, and patient zero would be Alessa. And the only reason SHP has come to be because it had a boost of power gained from Alessa herself. So Travis Grady easily becomes a pawn for Alessa, as Alessa's using him to further her cause of both getting revenge and finding a way to kind of split her body in half and send one half of her body outside of the town, outside of the nightmare. Whether to have a normal life or anything like that, who knows? Travis has no idea, but this is what he's a part of. This is the game he is playing right now. Now, this should be the very first sign that Silent Hill is no longer localized to just the town of Silent Hill. This easily could have broken into a multi-pronged storyline based in a few different places right at this point, but instead they just kept calling it Silent Hill and things like that. And I go into that in my other video where I explain that the title should not be Silent Hill because you have so much more, I guess, real estate in other parts of the plot. But I digress. So you're assisting in Alessa escaping. Alessa only knew of the power to escape or split herself and essentially split her body in half due to the fact that she's imbued now with the powers of Silent Hill, with the properties of Silent Hill. She has attained the powers of the Nexus itself and now has found a way to escape. This is in conjunction with a number of other different curses and magics and things of that sort, stuff more grounded in their religion, stuff more grounded in spirituality, and some of it not even having anything to do with the town itself. Let me do this in a more digestible way to explain this, kind of, so we can move on to the next game. Okay, so you have the Nexus. All right, we got that part down. There is a focal nexus point that is just haunted ground, or spiritual ground, or Spookyville, or whatever. Then you add the inclusion of a catalyst. This catalyst comes in, and by means of great distress, the nexus point can now latch itself onto this greatly distressed person. Rather than just absorbing it or something crazy like that, like it was DBZ, it feeds off of her just as much as she feeds off of it, and they begin helping each other. It's a tried and true method that basically says as long as a catalyst is in the nexus point, that becomes the main source of fuel for that engine. And so thus begins the SHP. However, back then, there is no SHP, okay? It makes sense there wouldn't be any because this would be the first example of it ever existing. But it's behind the wall of the actual real world with very little reach. So in Silent Hill Origins, you're dealing with Alessa gaining these new powers, but not being able to expand very far. Yeah. Now, before you get in my ass and start talking about the comic books and everything like that and what documents say, number one, I'm sticking to the initial games. Not the initial games, I'm sticking to all the games and only the games. You start talking about comic book land or movie land or the offshoot storyline of Shattered Memories, it starts making less and less sense only because they're... Focus, all right? If you want to add and include those things and say the whole theory falls apart because that isn't there, because I didn't include the comic... You got better things going on, probably. But what I will tell you is the first example of SHP happened in Origins, running with their example, if we're supposed to. And it happened when Grady was yanked into Silent Hill, and while he was attempting to help Alessa, he couldn't help but see memories and fragments of his past come back to attack him. He's not necessarily here to cause any problem. He isn't there to become the worst person ever. He had been through some shit. And yet somehow, even though he had been through some shit, he was being treated like a common protagonist or antagonist in a Silent Hill franchise. And he didn't really do anything. Anyway. Now, I can spare you the plot synopsis for these games, but what I can tell you is... Silent Hill 1 is when things take an interesting turn. Following with the SHP protocols, Silent Hill 1 is a very interesting and unique turn, as half of Alessa is now outside of the confines of Silent Hill. And while that may be all well and good, it's not Silent Hill that actually allows her to do it. It's all this other magical properties and her own magic that allows her to do it. Because before then, Silent Hill was kind of just limited to Silent Hill. It was just a haunted town with foggy stuff and magical things. Having Alessa be able to leave the barriers of the city itself in order to end up into the hands of Harry Mason and even be a sentient person on the other side of that. Cheryl was her own person. But she was conjured up through the power of Alessa in Silent Hill. She was broken off of Alessa. One side stayed here in Silent Hill, and the other side went out to live her life flipping burgers or, whatever the case may be. So this is when we first get examples of not being constrained to Silent Hill. And while it's pretty clear this is the first Silent Hill many people have played, especially the older fans and things like that, using the lines and plot ideologies from the newer Silent Hills on this retroactively turns into a situation where, yes, indeed, the first Silent Hill gave proof that Silent Hill could affect things outside of Silent Hill. I think I said Silent Hill way too many times in the same sentence, but anyway, so. And in this case, you get to see what happens when a seemingly innocent character walks into Silent Hill, can see manifestations, and they now have a physical form. This is not something where later on you think maybe I'm the only one that sees this. Harry sees these demons and birds and things of that sort flying around. There's no confusion there. Not only does he see it, but he can also see his daughter. He can also see regular people. He is just walking through this nightmare, and it changes around him. Rather than changes for him or to him, it changes around him, and he simply just travels through it. Now, because he hasn't had any sort of traumas and things of that sort, you don't necessarily get to see monsters conjured up just for him. There are no monsters based on his personality. All he sees are the monsters, his daughter, Sybil, regular humans. This is what abandoned Silent Hill looks like. And even when it goes into Otherworld, the only reason it goes into Otherworld is because the world and its plane changes. It doesn't change for him at all. It has no interest in him. And one could even say that even when he died in the beginning of the game, when being chased by the little ones, he came back to life. He was alive, and it was made to look like a nightmare, giving the impression that he was not being punished or anything for that matter. Instead, you're dealing with another situation where an innocent man believed he was doing the right thing, so now he shows up into Silent Hill where he finds that a cult is trying to resurrect a god. In the meantime, Alessa's power has now grown exponentially. You're allowed to see the other world, and instead of transitioning between the two, she can simply manipulate the world to transform into it. There's no more need to gain access to it. They're simply just becoming it. And this is symbolized by the air raid sirens and everything like that. And that's all well and good. But you can tell just how much more influence she has and how things are working here. You go through as Harry Mason, you find a number of different people walking around doing their own thing, but they seem to be stuck in the same loop that they were stuck in Origins. And because of that, this only means that they have been trapped in here that much longer. God only knows how long. We're going to assume since Cheryl is, 8 or 9 in the story, we've got to assume they've been trapped in here for about 10 years. Harry is too busy looking at the abandoned version of the city that has no power or anything like that. But God only knows what Dahlia sees, or Kaufman for that matter. While Lisa, all the while, has been simply watching the carcass that is Alessa. Now I'm going to completely turn your heads upside down on this one and propose this to you. Perhaps the SHP is not affecting Harry Mason at all. Perhaps it is, in fact, affecting Alessa right now. And due to her magical skills and aptitudes, she's simply making her delusions become a reality, and Harry has to walk down them. This is why the other world transitions without his control, as compared to Travis Grady, who could literally touch a mirror and jump in and out. Harry does not get that choice, and he does not get that choice because really he's dealing with whatever's conjured up by everyone else. Now, I could not tell you if the dogs or the mumblers or anything like that are conjured up because of Dahlia or Dr. Kaufman or because of Lisa, or simply because Alessa's in a nightmare realm where she is literally just thinking. And as she's thinking, Silent Hill says, okay, let's make it then. Let's make it. Let's make it. It is listening to the whims of the catalyst. So you're standing in a nexus and you're dealing with whatever the catalyst has to offer. I propose that Harry Mason, if he were to walk in here and there was no Alessa, for instance, if he were just a stranger walking into Silent Hill and Alessa was not here, then I submit that he would not see a thing. He'd see a ghost town with nothing more, nothing less. That's just what I propose. But using the SHP, the idea is that the delusions become reality, and reality morphs and manipulates. That's why you find a book with a story about a lizard, and all of a sudden you end up fighting the lizard, because this is something that was put into this world due to someone having it in their head. And in this case, since this is Alessa's school, I would assume this means Alessa read about this lizard and then made the lizard happen. Okay, things are going to get a little interesting with Silent Hill 2, but I need you to hang with me on this one, okay? Here's where things start getting really interesting as things seemingly made for a character or an antagonist or protagonist like James were being generated before he had even gotten to Silent Hill. Entities like Maria came to be and were slowly formed without the necessity of James actually being on the ground. So the first question that pops in is, how is this possible? Second question is he affected by SHP and thus creating Maria in town, being lured to the town by a letter conjured up in his own imagination? The answer is yes. Not only is he conjuring this up, but what he had done was to such a degree so heinous that his guilt and everything else layered on top of each other had started the effects of SHP. Now, I bet you're asking the next question, how is he affected by it? How is James affected by SHP wherever he may be? That answer is actually a lot easier than you think it is. Upon Alessa being able to escape Silent Hill, even a piece of her soul being able to escape Silent Hill, it had started to affect the outside world beyond Silent Hill. So much so that Silent Hill 2 seems to be a test phase. It seems to be a beta test for oncoming ideas. First, people are lured to Silent Hill, and a lot of people had this theory at first where you were lured to Silent Hill in order for anything to happen. No, what I mean is Silent Hill now had the ability to go outside of Silent Hill to use lures. It wasn't going to send Silent Hill murderers and pyramid heads everywhere all willy-nilly. It was going to send items or ideas or thoughts or people or visions and things like that. It was going to send it into the people's minds, and it was going to lure them back to Silent Hill where it had its main power and it could do its main primary function, which is that of punishment. And it succeeded. It actually got, and this is so far off the beaten path it's not even funny, so I'm prepared to argue in the comment section, it got 3 to 4 test subjects. It got an innocent, Laura. It got an absolute psychopath, Eddie. Angela, a victim. And then it got a killer in denial, like James. And it threw them all in Silent Hill at the same time, summoned them at the same time, and decided to punish them all at the same time, giving them various imageries and things like that they could only see once they actually got into town. Before then, they were in their own neck of the woods. They did not recognize each other, so obviously they weren't in a place where they could go, hey, I know you, you're Angela, you're that one girl. No, they didn't know each other. Silent Hill had been testing its power, or Alessa had been testing its power, or at this point, perhaps SHP is a little bit of both, and they are now one and the same. Who knows? This theory has gone so far off the rails, it's not even funny anyway, so there's no way to prove yes or no anyway. But if there's any indication, Silent Hill 2 was the very first test of the idea that Silent Hill had a reach outside of Silent Hill itself. Before it was a test to see if Silent Hill could at least stand outside of Silent Hill. This was a test to see if it could actually affect things outside of Silent Hill. And the answer is yes. Okay, so this is where things start taking an interesting turn, because as we get closer to the Western versions of the Silent Hill universe, the SHP seems to be far more flexible, I guess I want to say. It actually works with the plot line a lot better, and things start to actually connect a little better. It's not to say that's a good thing, because at present, I'm thoroughly unconvinced, and with as many things as I have had to omit, it just doesn't make for a good storyline overall. But if the goal here is to connect everything together, then fine. Let's see how it goes. But let's move to Silent Hill 3. Silent Hill 3 was the first example of the catalyst had left the Nexus. So the catalyst being Alessa was now in the form of Heather here, who was far from Silent Hill. She wasn't in Silent Hill. The story didn't start in Silent Hill or anything like that, and she was actually drawn to it. Contrary to the previous iterations of Silent Hill, this one took place, if anything, in a nameless city outside of Silent Hill, and this is where Heather was sought out. There were other folks as well that were in Silent Hill that actually made it out of Silent Hill just in time to talk with Heather, Claudia being one great example of that, and then monsters to follow. We're going to set aside the fact that there are dream sequences and things like that because that really doesn't mean anything. However, the idea that Alessa had these abilities and the idea that Alessa was able to conjure a new side of her soul and put it and cast it out of Silent Hill means that this was an escape. This was supposed to be an end to that sequence. It was supposed to be over with. The catalyst had now left the Nexus. This is a double-edged sword, as two different things are going on at once here. The antagonists are looking for Heather to summon God, and their chase through the entirety of the game shows just that. However, what they fail to mention and what they continue to pretend isn't a factor in all of this is the fact that Heather was outside of Silent Hill to begin with, and she was able to take it wherever she went. Now, I believe if you're using SHP as a working theory, which right now it's working as a very, very loose term, but if you're using SHP as a working theory, then I propose that Heather had in fact infected the areas she went to and blighted it, essentially. Now, bear in mind, the initial plotline of summoning God is still there. It makes sense what they're doing. This just acknowledges the fact that Claudia and the rest of the cult have focused their energy on the power that is Alessa, and that's it. They didn't go any further beyond that. What they hadn't thought about is just how much she can affect the outside world, how much she had, in fact, tainted the outside world. Heather didn't think anything of it as she was just escaping her crazy supernatural past in Silent Hill, but what she doesn't know is that when using the abilities of Silent Hill, she was able to take that blight and that corruption wherever she went, and she had in fact done this. What I'm saying is Heather had opened Pandora's box and didn't even mean to. In tandem with the abilities and powers given to her by Silent Hill itself and her own powers, she was now able to traverse between her town and Silent Hill and bring the darkness in each and every one of those places. This is a more controlled view of a plague or a virus, as the infection or corruption was within the confines of Heather or Alessa. And that was kind of it. Those that were there along the way, they were affected in some ways, but not too much of the others. No one was actually condemned or forced to stay here or anything like that. They didn't have to stay in Silent Hill. You had Claudia walking around in other towns, so it wasn't completely isolated anymore. Now, in part 1, it was absolutely isolated, but by part 3, you now got to see what happens when people are met outside of town, when things happen outside of town, stuff like that. So in essence, SHP's earliest bits of information, and this comes from a lot of my comments on my videos as well, the spread and influence of Silent Hill happened far early on, ranging back from really the origins. But if you wanted to get specific, part 1 is a good example, as Harry finds a baby, and that baby is not in Silent Hill. In part 2, James receives a letter from his wife, but that letter from his wife didn't come from Silent Hill. Whether it came to him in his own mind or what have you, the fact that it even happened and existed and he could actually see the letter means that his depression and guilt had been taken by the influence of Silent Hill and Alessa's magic, which we're now dubbing the SHP. The Silent Hill Nexus was, as it is, a standalone mystical land of value. You go on that land, your cults come in, they worship whatever. It's really inconsequential, really, in terms of adding to this lore here. But what ends up happening is Alessa shows up. She becomes the catalyst in allowing Silent Hill's expansion to spread. And it isn't a standard expansion. It's more along the lines of a test phase in which it starts off with something as simple as, for instance, in Silent Hill 3, Heather being able to walk around in other parts of town and still affect the other parts of town, much like Silent Hill was affected. This would not happen if she were not in those zones. So the overall nexus has increased in its reach. But because we can't say the world is a nexus, it more revolves around the properties of, what's a good example? In the Silent Hill movie, the mom, basically, Sharon, she basically walks into the church bringing the corruption in with her, and then she spills it out onto the floor. Funny enough, this is the only time the movie's plotline will actually assist in doing something beneficial towards making a plot string happen. Okay, you guys are really going to have to follow with me on this one, because once we get to Silent Hill 4, we start to see a lot of differences in how the game is played and how they've actually built the world. Obviously, there's a lot of UI changes and things like that, but more importantly, Silent Hill isn't quite the Silent Hill you know and love and remember. As you're following the story of Townsend, Mr. Henry Townsend, as he gets down to the mystery of why a serial killer seems to be chasing him throughout a number of different places, and why he's locked in his own apartment, so on and so forth. Longest story short, you have the serial killer performing something called the 21 Sacraments, which is a sacrificial ritual meant to bring back his mother, as well as bring paradise in the world. Now, his mother, whether it means metaphorically or figuratively or literally, him bringing her back, everyone knew it was going to be bad, because he intended on bringing paradise on earth, and every religion and every sect and cult in this little universe has always seemingly been speaking backwards. So you knew paradise on earth was not going to be paradise. In fact, it was going to be suck times. But I digress. So as you go through the story, a few things of note. We're going to skip past the order and things like that, because we already know there was an order. Hell, we already knew there was an order, and there were already cults in 1, 2, and 3 as well. We got that part. Here's what we didn't have. We didn't have the ability to traverse different worlds and other worlds, and there was one reason in particular why. Walter Sullivan performed a ritual within a ritual called the Rite of Holy Assumption, which allows him to create allows him to be the sacrifice in his own ritual, the initial ritual, as well as create other worlds on his own. He can create them pretty much on a whim, but in making sure that he sacrificed himself, he is now able to live inside these other world realms while not living in the real world anymore. Whether or not he believed this was a way to get closer to his mother or not, who really knows? But he was able to do this. This story takes place primarily in Ashfield, and Ashfield is about a day and a half away from Silent Hill. So if we're going by distance, the best thing we can do is go by time and distance. It takes a day and a half to get to Silent Hill from Ashfield. Yes, we go through a portal and we get to Silent Hill from time to time. I get that. But now I need you to focus on the more impertinent detail, which is the amount of time and the series of distance. Yes, Henry is a unwitting, sacrificial test subject in Walter Sullivan's attempt to bring about hell on earth. Oh, I get that. And by itself, that story stands on its own 2 feet. We don't have to question that. However, the fact that he has enough of that power to do so harkens back to Silent Hill 3. As I've explained, the Nexus Point has increased its influence and increased its expansion. You already had your magical hoopa-joop with all the cults and everything like that, so that part is solid. It is rock solid. However, the SHP event behind Silent Hill 4 is actually Walter creating his own SHP event by offing himself, becoming one of the sacraments. He made himself into one of the sacrifices for the ritual, and in doing so, he was taught how to create other worlds as well. So not only could he create them, but now he permanently fixed himself inside them. He trapped himself in his own other worlds where he could continue the ritual as he needed. He was not limited or hampered down by the real world or getting in a car or calling an Uber. He literally made an other world for himself and then ended himself to stay there forever, which is a very interesting move, but this is something we haven't seen before in a Silent Hill. We haven't seen someone create their own SHP event. We've seen people unwittingly become an SHP event. We've seen catalysts in the process, things like that. But the catalyst here, simply put, was the Rite of Holy Assumption ritual. Once the Rite of Holy Assumption ritual was activated, it became the catalyst that the Nexus Point Silent Hill needed in order to create various other worlds, which, to be fairly honest, didn't even need to be connected at this point. So that's what we're looking right now for Silent Hill 4. You know, it's an offshoot story, to be sure. You had James's father running around in the storyline, which is kind of cool and everything like that. But for the most part, you dealt with what you got. It was on face value. This is what happens when Silent Hill's expansion had spread. And this is also why arguments now, when people say, I don't like that Silent Hill doesn't take place in Silent Hill, this is the first place people go. They say, hey, well, what about Silent Hill 4? What about that? What about Ashfield? We're going to pretend that didn't happen? And I'd like to believe that the argument is more along the lines of, this doesn't feel like Silent Hill, doesn't take place in Silent Hill. Yes, you could be very simplistic and say, hey, this needs to be in Silent Hill, but does it? Probably not. To be fairly honest, Silent Hill 4, I actually liked it. I don't know if there's a lot of people. It's really, really 50-50, hit or miss. But, there goes James' dad right there. But it's really hit or miss, but I like Silent Hill 4. For one, the animations on the enemies were haunting, but it also introduced so many new things. You were like, what is going on here? And it brought about more theory. And I remember spending countless nights on GaiaOnline.com talking to my future wife about theories on who Walter was, why he did what he did, so on and so forth. But yeah, Silent Hill 4 comes with its own pre-built SHP event, thanks and due to Walter Sullivan. I do love how simplistic Silent Hill 4's storyline is, and when it comes to the SHP and just how well it molds in, this is the least amount of reaching I've had to do. Still reaching, to be sure, but this is the least amount of reaching, so it's something. I don't know. Let's keep going. Okay, this is going to be a bit of a doozy because I know how much everyone absolutely adores Homecoming, and I use that very, very sarcastically, but bear with me. This is the first Western-made Silent Hill, Homecoming. It contained blah, blah, blah. You know how this works. Okay, so we're going to get to the brass tacks of it all. You have your main character who turns out to have murdered his little brother, carried on by the guilt. He's seeing shit. You know, you get the idea. So behind the scenes, the main character learns that in a separate town altogether, Shepherd's Glen, it contains founders that were the original members of the Silent Hill order. And in order to escape and kind of like be done with the gang, so to speak, that they were charged with making sure that they sacrifice kids. Every 50 years, they sacrifice a child. This was all well and good, and they had stayed on their path up until the point in which our main character actually accidentally got his little brother drowned, and in doing so, ruined the whole thing, set everything into a spiral of madness. All things turned topsy-turvy, and it was our hero's fault. And that's great and everything, but dear Alex here, while he's running around through all the nightmares, has not focused on the SHP part of the entire story. But don't worry, I got him covered. So the SHP event is actually a very, very interesting one because the catalyst in this story is the actual town of Shepherd's Glen. It is, in fact, entirely the catalyst. Silent Hill and its ties to Silent Hill be damned, because once these people ran to Shepherd's Glen and formed their own town, blah, 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 years and years later, they saw no real concerns or worries. Well, what they also didn't tell you is that they're essentially cursed. Shepherd's Glen is cursed with having to sacrifice or be left with what you're looking at now. It just so happens that Alex walked in on this while trying to figure out who he is. He went through his own traumas. So you had the SHP event revolving around the trauma of his brother dying. Not only that, but you have the SHP event revolving entirely around the town kind of in a panic because the child that was supposed to be sacrificed did not get sacrificed. So you have two SHP events going on at the same exact time in an entirely different place that is not Silent Hill, and is not connected to Alessa, is not connected to anything from the original Silent Hills. But once again, like part 4, part of a ritual or part of a curse, part of a magical thing that happened. It extended the reach of Silent Hill all the way to Shepherd's Glen. and kind of implanted itself there. Now, one could say that the curse or whatever the hell has been put on Shepherd's Glen is not really a curse, and the SHP event is the only thing bringing these monsters to life. The fact that they're panicking about not sacrificing the right people can bring them into enough of a mental duress, situation that only then will all of Shepherd's Glen start falling apart on itself. Yeah, sure, you could say that. Or you could say there was a magical property involved in it from Silent Hill attaching itself to Shepherd's Glen because of the order. That could work too. Either way, the SHP event is very, very simple. Once all the chips were down and Alex arrived, that's when everything started kind of falling apart. So you had two SHPs happening at the same godforsaken time, and I don't know if it actually helped or made things worse. But there you are. The easiest one by far is Downpour. Every single person in this town, single-handedly at this point, now that all the other doors have been open, can open up SHP events that pretty much make anything happen. That's all well and good. I'm more interested about this Howard dude, the postman. When I first initially saw him, I was like, okay, fine. But he seems to be the only one that kind of floats in between guilty or non-guilty and doesn't seem threatened by anything happening. However, he does stick to his postman kind of gimmick pretty strongly. He doesn't seem to have any goals or agendas or anything like that. However, he does do a lot of speaking, what almost feels like speaking on behalf of Silent Hill itself or the SHP events or whatever powers that be or God or whatever the case may be. He seems to have a vast knowledge of it. Now, Pendleton gets to the end of the story of Downpour, come to find out that he ended up putting a man in a vegetative state, and the real hero / anti-hero of the story is the female officer who's been chasing him around the whole story. That's all well and good. During this time, you can choose what to do, when to do it, and because you're surrounded by so much going on, whether it's negative juju or magical energy, you get what you pay for. The last 5 iterations of Silent Hills can explain everything that led up to this moment, if you're hanging on to this. However, my biggest concern is it took about 5 Silent Hills to flesh this out to the point in which you get to Downpour and you have nothing left. This is just a story about a ex-prisoner who runs into a creepy town, and there are people that are kind of messed up too, and they may see some things, they may not see some things, and in the end, you transform into the punishment to another character that you do not even play as. This is where things started falling off for me, and this is where I started getting mad because I couldn't feel like there was any way this could feel any less like Silent Hill. This was more like a short story someone wrote for Silent Hill. This felt like a Silent Hill inspired story. This kind of was it. There wasn't much else to it. And more times than not, every ending I saw didn't help. It just felt... Now, don't get me wrong, the atmosphere was great. It looked cool. It looked the part. The storyline, however, maybe it was just because the Westerners did it or what, I have no idea. But you can fit an SHP into every single character in this one, and it still kind of does nothing for the story. You have Pendleton, and he's definitely clouded with a whole bunch of bad stuff going on, and he's an ex-prisoner, so, I mean, that goes without saying. And then you have much of the town doing the very same thing, walking around aimlessly. But that mailman, I need to know about him. I need him to show up in more things. I need some explanations as to what he is. If you got something in the comments, let me know. I'm very curious. I already popped in a comic book at one point. Anyway, the only thing that seems to be lining up right now is the fact that as each subsequent Silent Hill comes out, Silent Hill's influence and expansion grows. And it doesn't grow by regular means like a symbiote or like some sort of weird flood or anything like that. It's the people. It's for every little small person that is able to escape or put a seed somewhere, it grows the influence that much more. And this is the only way... Oh, hey, watch it now. This is the only way the SHP theory works ultimately, and the only way it makes sense. Fine, I get it. On the side, and I use this term very specifically for this reason. On the side, you have a cult. On the side, you have a town that's magic is just in the grounds. It's hallowed grounds or holy lands or whatever on the side. And then you have the presence of negative emotions, traumas, things like that, that actually awaken once this power comes in connection. You have the nexus point, and then you have the catalyst. And the only way the SHP works is if you disregard or minimize the cult side of things. You would have to actually get more science than you would metaphysical. And I think, stretching as far as I've could in this video, trying to make SHP work, I think I have made it work, even a little bit, but it's not a good way to make it work. I think ultimately it leaves the mystery and it leaves the supernatural side of things in the back burner. Also, you can say, if enough depressed people are depressed now in any town, you're fucked. I get it. Okay, I get that. And Silent Hill Ascension comes out, and I set aside the fact that it's awful. Silent Hill Ascension comes out, and it looks like the influence of Silent Hill or SHPs are everywhere now. So everyone goes, why is that? Well, this is why, because they have negative feelings. I get that, but what are you doing about the cult? I don't know. There's some cults. There's a bunch of different cults, man. And all of them believe in different things and different religions, so whatever. Why not merge the two? Why not come together and kind of meet midway with a lore you've already established along with a lore you're building now? I get it, there were hints that dropped at this and things like that, but now you're establishing it. You've made this the law. And because you've made it the law, I can't refute it. I can't say as a fan, this does not work, because I have no choice. However, I can still say this is bad. I will watch every subsequent Silent Hill that comes out, and I will follow the lore and storylines and try to connect dots like I did with every Silent Hill in the past. But this is such a lazy route to go that you know what it reminds me of? When Disney bought Star Wars, and they immediately said, hey, any extended universe stuff, any books, comics, games, or whatever, it's not canon anymore. Deal with it. And that's what Disney did. And it took them about 10 years to realize the mistake they had made, because all the fans were so dependent on the side lore and all this other extra stuff that they were like, no, we're going to stick with one core plot line. That's what it feels like. And I hate it. I hate it a lot, actually. Anyway, I could keep connecting, or I could keep talking about the SHP or connecting it to any other Silent Hill versions. If you like, let me know in the comments. I'm interested to know what you think, but in the meantime, I'm getting the hell out of Dodge. This video's been long enough. I had to go and edit it and stop it, as you've noticed. I've changed hats a few different times because this video's gone through a span of like 3 or 4 days. But I'm getting out of here. A special shout out to all my Patreons, everybody out there who's been patient waiting for my next video. I appreciate you guys. I really do. You guys are amazing. But yeah, let's just yeah, I got nothing. Anyway. Much love, guys. Later.